All right, so video 4, there's a lot in this last one. We're trying to cram a lot in here. Good, it's helpful. So take a breath, here we go. So creating content. So we're gonna jump back into just really this prepare phase as for leaders, this onboarding process. So we've talked about in this training video, these training videos, the importance of creating really good content to help leaders be successful, where they move from a team, where they're moving from team member to a leader. We'll talk about from a leader to a coach and so forth. But if we go back to with video 2, we talked about this idea of creating ministry-specific trainings rather than just having this generic leadership process. And so the conversation we're going to have today is asking this question. What are those competencies or those skills that every leader needs to have as they step into your role? And so Kim, the idea, so take us from here. Where are we going? What does this conversation look like?
Okay, so first of all, don't let intimidation get you here, because as we talked about in the last one, there's so much content out there. So we're not asking you to reinvent the wheel, because even as you begin to think about what skills that you might want your leaders to have, you can say, oh, I don't know how to teach that. You can find that out there. The content is there, okay? And you don't have to make the Zach and Kim show in traiing, those kind of things. Like,
it's
that's
impossible. You can't reproduce this. This is
nobody wants to, right? You don't want to torture your volunteers that way. So there's some good things that you need to think about when you're looking at competencies. So competencies are, if I had 5 skills that all of my leaders had, they would be really successful at this. Now, let's be honest, there's probably 50 of them we won't, but that's just not realistic. So what's the top 5 things that you would want people in your ministry, a leader in your ministry? And remember, we go from team member, and then there is a leader. So this is the lower level of leadership within your ministry, but they're the ones in the nitty gritty of your ministry, right? So they need to be real ministry specific competencies. So there are 5 elements that make a good competency. Why don't we take these bit by bit? So what's number 1?
Yeah, a good competency gives potential leaders confidence in this role. Mm-hmm. And so, so let's go back to my, you throw me under the bus of my little ELT elder gun shooting thing. Like, having the competency that I know that I'm not going to shoot somebody would give me confidence. Like, okay, like I could do this. Like I know some of the basic gun skills. Like I know we're being a little silly here, but it's true. Like the basic, the competency was give Zach basic gun skills so he doesn't hurt himself or somebody else. Mm-hmm. Like that's a really good competency for me to have if you're going to give me a gun and go shooting with elders and ELT. Like the only bad things could happen. But it gave me the confidence. It gave me a potential leader or a potential shooter, in a sense, of confidence that I know I wasn't going to hurt anyone.
Right.
And I appreciate Ben walked us through and gave us good. Ben and Greg
right.
gave us someone who's never shot before. Like that was a really helpful thing to have confidence to know that I wasn't going to hurt myself or I wasn't going to hurt anyone else on purpose or on accident. Mm-hmm. Not on purpose, or just on accident.
You want to think about those competencies as going to give them confidence in this role. That also reflects kind of what Zach said earlier about that generic versus specific. So we can read a generic discipleship group about loving people and sharing the gospel. Well, that's great. That's a huge thing we want everybody to have. But that might not give them confidence when they walk into a classroom filled with 15 3-year-olds, right? So I need to give them competencies that are real specific to the task at hand for that leader, to give them confidence in the role that you're asking them to fill as a leader. So the second one is a good competency should be reflective of the leadership's expectations. So it's one thing to create these fluffy competencies that sound good and feel good, but if they're walking in those competencies and at the end of a Sunday morning, they really haven't accomplished what you're wanting them to accomplish, it's not really good. They just sounded good on paper. So you want to be realistic of, are these 5 competencies that I'm picking for my leaders, are those competencies that the outcome is going to be the outcomes that I have picked for this ministry? And so you want to make sure that they truly are fulfilling what your goal is or what your outcome is as a leader for this ministry. So that's what's number 3.
Give us an example. What do you mean by that, Kim? Like, give us a practical illustration.
So one of my competencies for children's ministry would be that my leaders would be able to connect with parents in a way that encourages them and lifts them up. So I want to make sure that I just don't do a generic fluff that they're just able to connect with people, but the competency that I'm giving them truly does teach them that when they engage the parents to say, hey, little Johnny was great this morning. We appreciated how he engaged this way or that way, to remind the parents on what a great kid they have, but also encourage them on what they're pulling out in their child and what they're seeing, the gifts and talents in their child. So I'm not just saying, hey, I want you to connect with parents and they're talking about football, which there's a place for that, but there's an even more specific thing at hand and how to encourage a parent. So that is the outcome that I want, is that we're encouraging our parents. And so I need that competency to be reflective of the outcome that I'm looking for.
Good. Number 3, a good competency should reflect into the specific for that role. So I'll just keep throwing myself on the bus here. This using this elder ELT retreat gun shooting thing. Like the goal is to help me hit the little skeet. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, clay pigeon.
Yeah, clay pigeon. There you go. Yeah. That's the goal, to try and at least hit one, right? Out of how many you are. And so if Ben would have gave me skills to how to clean the gun, that might have been really helpful to make sure that the gun would have been, how to take proper maintenance of a gun. That's related to shooting and all that, taking care and hitting that could have been helpful. But the skill Ben needed to teach me was how to look down the barrel the right way. Like that helped me to know how to accomplish the goal. Mm-hmm. There's lots of things you could teach me about gun safety that would not have been relevant to me because I don't own a gun in that sense. Or back to the ministry, to say I want all my my small group leaders to be able to fully study and expositate God's word in a really proper, healthy way. Like that's a really good skill I'd want them to have, to be able to really fully know how to read and study and properly exegete God's word. The reality, most of them are picking up a small group discussion guide. They're usually really good in doing that. And so not that I don't want them to have that skill. The skill I want them to have is how to lead engaging conversation. We could backfill some of those other opportunities, but for them to start, what they really need to know is how to do that well. And so that's what I'm asking them to do, and not necessarily asking them to be a Bible scholar right. when they start. So right. It kind of helps. Yeah, having that competency should reflect into the job that we're asking them to do, not just generic responsibilities we hope they could do.
Right. So number 1, we said a good competency gives potential leader great confidence in their role. They want to feel like they're ready to take on this role from the competencies that you've taught them. Number 2, a competency should reflect the leadership's expectations. You want to make sure you're driving that train to where you really want it to go to, and you need to process that as you're looking at the competencies. Number 3, a good competency should be reflective of the specifics of that role, like really knowing what do you want them to do in this role and specifically, and then make sure those competencies reflect that. And now number 4 is a good competency gives confidence to know that they did a good job. I love this because you can set off to do a task. Like let's say we talked about that knowledge piece. You have the knowledge and you go and do it. But then at the end of the day, you're like, did I do a good job or not? Like I felt really good in the middle of it, but did I hit the goal that I was supposed to hit? And so your competencies need to be something that they can reflect on, just that self-reflection piece, and that they know at the end of the day, if I was A, B, C, D, and E, and if I got the majority of these, that was a good day. I might not have been perfect, but I was better than I was last week at these things. And I was intentional to head towards these things. So today was a successful day for me. It's giving them that mentality to be self-reflective. But then also when you would come alongside and reflect with them, how did you do in this? It gives you questions to ask, reflective questions, just even focusing on those 5 competencies of how did you do in this area. So what's the number 5?
Last one is a good competency should have a measurable outcome, which allows for self-evaluation and coaching. Kind of what you said, kind of go a little farther, takes what you just said and go a little bit farther here, Kim. So to say like, hey, did I engage a good conversation? So I could look around and like, did it, my small group tonight, did everyone talk? Did everyone share? Was there meaningful discussion, or did it all stay at the surface? Like, and I could go, so I could, Kim, if you're my coach and you're asking me, hey, Zach, so you did your small group last night, like, tell me about the engaging conversation that was happening. And you can ask me, like, well, nobody really shared anything that was significant as a coach, or, as a person above that person. I could say, well, why do you think that is? What happened, or what was the cause? And it just allows a leader not to be felt like they're being picked on or scolded, but just to say, we want to help you. We want to help you grow in this ability to create conversations that are good and engaging and transformational. And so it allows for that leader to kind of self-reflect, like, how can I do a better job next time, just to grow as a leader. Then also for a coach or somebody above them to go, just ask them some basic questions to help them be better. So we all need somebody in our lives to ask us a question or two. We all know the answer. It is sometimes it's helpful to have somebody ask us a question to help us process that answer.
I love this because when you don't have competencies in place and you're trying to reflect and give feedback with someone, it can feel very personal. It can feel like you failed at something or whatever. But with competencies, we're looking at the competency to say, how did we do within this? So it makes it a conversation and a feedback about a competency and a skill within that, not as personal. It helps you reflect personally on how you did within that competency, but it's not it doesn't feel as direct. It doesn't feel as derogatory. So it gives you a good platform to have those conversations on. So I know you're like, okay, but like, what's a competency? Like, it's all still up in the clouds. So I love this. Zach is great and has done a great job at developing his competencies. And so one of the many groups that you manage is the leadership development group. So Zach, would you share with us the 5 competencies that you've chosen for a leader in the leadership development groups?
Yeah, so the 5, so if somebody's going to lead a leadership development group, you got to have, you got to have these skills, or we think you could grow in these skills. So one, you got to have the ability to have good one-on-one conversations. We just think that the valuable life happens when I'm sitting across from you at a Starbucks, over dinner, over lunch, at my house. Like, to be able to sit there and have meaningful one-on-one discussions is really, really important. I think for somebody to lead an engaging group conversation, like that, those groups are 3 hours long. Like that, you got to be able to lead that. You got to be able to lead that really well and be able to facilitate meaningful conversations. You have to be able to also know how to invest in future leaders. Like, they're part of our leadership pipeline discussion, and so we want to help them fully recognize that who they're leading and why they're leading them. And so we feel like that we got to have that skill and that heartbeat to know how to invest in future leaders. They need to be a practicing vulnerable leader, that they know how to be vulnerable and what does that look like in the context of a group and other people. And we want them to know, I want them to have a skill to be able to practice spiritual leadership, that they have a heart and that the practices where we can ask them, are you a leader that we want you being reproduced in other people's lives? And so those are our 5 competencies that we use for leadership development groups.
I love those because they pass those tests. They can give me confidence that if you're giving me these skills and these competencies in your trainings and in your modules before I start this leadership role, I'm going to have confidence in my role. I'm going to be able to know where Zach is wanting me to go with this, Zach's expectations and hearts for a leadership development group leader. They are specific to that role for leadership development group, because some other groups may only be 30 minutes. This is a 3-hour one. So they're real specific to what's needed for that one. At the end of the night, if they can reflect on these and how well they did at that, they can know that they did a good job in that. And then they also allow a measurability to say, you know what, I did okay here, but I need to do better. I met one level there, but I need to go further. And so I think all of those pass that good competency test. So good job, Zach. In my world, I would give you a sticker.
Yes.
So that's not as intimidating. So what we would like you to do, and you're going to see in one of your homework things this year, is we want you to work together with your team and come up with what might be some specific competencies. But we do want you to do that before your debrief. You don't have to come up with all 5 before the debrief.
Come up with one.
Come up with one. One is great. Just so when we do our debrief and we're meeting with people from other ministries, we want to be able to have those conversations, okay? So come up with one competency specific to a leader role in your area, and then that way we can discuss it in our debrief.
The other thing I just would share is that just that sense of we want to go back to that content. We don't overuse. And the idea of 5 is there's so much we can train for. And so we want to help you train and develop your people to be successful in the areas you want them to. And so we don't just being generic. We want to help you. These competencies help us focus and be intentional in developing people. And so, so it goes back. We want to help us focus in these areas to really develop the people and the heartbeat and the experience. So we'll walk through that a little bit more as we keep going through this. But the goal is to develop specific people to be disciple makers, not just performers or fill in the warm bodies. Like this is part of our disciple making process. So have fun. Oh, the other thing I would say, stay broad. So for you children's, like children's ministry, you can have 100 of these spots. Like be really broad in these conversations just for right now. Like we're baby stages in these conversations. So don't worry about children's ministry check-in, or don't worry about children's ministry event team. Like stay in your biggest broad groups you possibly can. So small group leaders, or seniors or tech people or whatever, like stay broad in this conversation. Don't worry about the small little groups. We'll get to them later. But for right now, think about your broadest groups and how a competency you could write from.